Hi, everyone. We are officially live. And although it's not a we today, it's a me today. I'm all by myself, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about how to stay mentally healthy during these times. I know I'm getting a lot of messages about this, and a lot of people who are obviously struggling right now, both friends and clients. And I just think it would be helpful to kind of go through what are some strategies for kind of taking care of yourself mentally. And I would love to hear your questions if you have any questions as well. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to get fancy up in here. So let's see here. Actually, I'm going to start with today I'm going to talk about a couple of different aspects, and I'm going to switch myself off the screen. I'm going to talk about what we can do for ourselves, what we are feeling, and how to handle that, support and connection, and coping strategies. So that'll be some of the stuff. Well, that's everything we're going to be covering today. And the reality is, I could talk about this forever. I could talk for days on this. And so I think it was difficult trying to figure out like what would be the most helpful, and trying to pick just a few things, because there are really so many things that we can be doing for ourselves. So it's not an exhaustive list, but hopefully it'll give you some ideas and get you, started with something. So the first thing is, what can we do for ourselves? And I have touched on these things if you've listened to any of the videos in the last week, or from last week or from this week. I've touched on these a few times, and so some of them might be a little bit repetitive, but I wanted to put them here for the people who are just coming to listen to this video. But I also think it bears worth saying, because sometimes get so caught up in our day-to-day and our stress, and we forget to do the things that maybe we already know we need to do. So I consider these habits, quick wins, and self-care. So some of the habits that I know I've touched on, but it again bears repeating, is what are you taking in? And I think right now, when we're in this global pandemic, really this is something that's unprecedented. We really have to be mindful, because everything is this 24/7 news cycle, and we have to think about what are we taking in. And not just the news about all of the COVID stuff and what's going on, but also just being even mindful of the other kinds of things that we're taking in that might be negative or um, really emotional. So it's something to be mindful of. And your capacity is going to vary from person to person. What one person can do and kind of tolerate would be really traumatic for someone else. I think I've had this conversation with people where I have some friends who are watching the movie Contagion, and others who wouldn't even consider it because it's just too triggering right now. And so this is part of knowing yourself. But I do think it is important that even if you don't think you're being affected by this, it's one of those tips of try limiting it, try being aware of what you're taking in, because you can kind of get to this point where it starts to build up slowly. And the goal here is, let's try to stay mentally healthy and not get to the point where we're dealing with real depression or chronic anxiety. And so these are just small tips on that. The other thing is other people's stuff. We can be consuming junk, we can be consuming news and a lot of negativity, but I think when we're already in these times that are higher stress, we have to be mindful that maybe other people, we either have to limit our contact with them. It could be somebody we really care about, but maybe they can't stop talking about negative stuff, and it might not even have anything to do with COVID. They just might naturally be that way. Just to be extra mindful that maybe your tolerance isn't going to be what it usually is, and that's okay. And it's okay to set boundaries around that. Habits. So this is another one where it's, maybe you've heard it over and over and over, and the reason is because it's true. And so it's really important to be aware of, how are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough sleep? And you might actually find that you're needing more sleep right now than normal. Or maybe you're having more disrupted sleep. So just to be aware of that and to kind of give yourself what you're needing. Are you getting out and moving? Maybe you aren't able to get out of your house depending on where you are. Some people's level of lockdown in their city is stricter than others. Maybe you're able to go outside if you're lucky enough to have a yard. But anything to be moving. I mean, you can have a dance party in your own home. You don't have to leave. And right now there are so many places that are streaming like free exercises and classes and so many different kinds of fun things that you can be doing from the comfort of your home. The other one is regular eating, because I think this is something that people like, especially because our routines are a little bit off and maybe you're still finding your way into your new routine. So making sure that you're actually checking in and eating. I know there are people that are talking to me and they're stress eating, so they're kind of grazing all day. And then there's people who say during stressful times they don't eat, and so they have to kind of remind themselves or be reminded by people in their family. So that's another thing to kind of look at, because when we eat regularly, it stabilizes our blood sugar. And part of, when we're talking about stuff like becoming really depressed or being really paralyzed by anxiety, a lot of this is biological. There's a lot of chemical biological components. So some of this stuff is the foundation for making sure that's not going to be an issue or trying to stave off that. And then there's going to be your environmental stuff or just other things going on. So the more we can kind of help ourselves out. Does this mean that if you eat regularly, you won't become depressed? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying it's all of these small things that we can do for ourselves that kind of tip the scales in our favor. And that's really the goal here. And you're not going to be perfect at it. And that's okay, because that's, again, not the goal. But it's just about remembering that you may think like, oh, that's not really important, but it actually is. These things, these core habits really are the foundation for our mental health and our physical health, our well-being. The other thing is self-care. This one, I know self-care sometimes gets like a bad rap that it's all about going to the spa, which clearly is not happening right now. But it's also about how we care for ourselves, how we nurture ourselves and make sure that we're able to show up the best that we can for ourselves. So another big one is having downtime. I am talking to a lot of people who are feeling either stressed about their business or their work, or there's an expectation to do a lot of work. And so basically, and especially if they have kids at home, but even for people who don't, it's like all of their thing is work and taking care of people and just trying to do the day-to-day. And then they don't really take any downtime for themselves. And I know it's a struggle, and I know we all have our unique challenges, but I really think it's important to try to work that in as much as possible. And I do think it is possible. I think sometimes we have to get creative. Another big one is meditation or silence. Like maybe you're not somebody who's meditated, or maybe you're not drawn to that. There's a lot of research that shows that meditation is hugely beneficial. But that doesn't mean you're going to do it. Just because we know something's going to work doesn't mean we're the kind of people who are going to do that. But doing meditation is something that's really helpful, especially in these times when so much is outside of our control. It's actually a way of training your brain to focus on things on purpose. So it helps kind of teach us, how do we bring our brain back when we're kind of spiraling down an emotional spiral, or we're stuck in these thought patterns or this repetitive thought, and we just can't seem to get ourselves out of there. It's just one of the tools in your toolbox, if you will. And there are so many different kinds of meditation. You can also just use silence. I think we could all use like a little bit of silence. And sometimes that's very uncomfortable for people. So that's why there are other kinds of meditation as well. Like there are a lot of guided meditations, and a lot of these apps or programs that have great guided meditations are offering free services as well right now, which is really wonderful. But there's so much stuff on, podcasts that are all about meditation, or there's YouTube videos about meditation. I think you have to find someone that kind of like you like their voice. I think that's hugely important. And, finding somebody whose style you like, but there's all different kinds. Even taking a walk or yoga. So it might not be like you're sitting there, with your legs crossed like you picture. It really can look different. So I would really suggest looking into something like that. Non-screen activities. I think this one's a big one. So many of us now are working online, and maybe we're seeing clients virtually, or we're, working with coworkers virtually. So we're doing a lot more stuff on the screen. We know that the screen, being on blue screens, first of all, does disrupt your circadian rhythm. And that's the biological rhythm that allows you to get sleep. It kind of is like what turns on and off cortisol and melatonin in your body. So it's really good for you to take breaks and have activities that you're doing not on the screen. And so again, I'm not telling you not to do the thing you love. Like if you love playing video games, play video games, but try to change it up and do like board games or other kinds of things as well. Just kind of changing it up. The other one is fresh air. So getting outside, getting some, if you can. And for some people, I know they're like on a further lockdown, like I said, depending on what part of the country you're in. And, even if it's just opening the windows or if you have a balcony, standing out there and just doing some deep breathing, it's any way you can get it, try to get as much fresh air as possible. It's just one of those things, like it does change our mood, and it changes, kind of the place that we're in mentally. And so it's just taking those little breathers and breaks. The last one is laughter and play. This one is hard when we're under so much stress and we can forget about it because we can just be like head down trying to get through the day. But it's so helpful and healthy to try to find ways to find laughter and play. And that looks so different for everybody. And there's no one way to do it. So I don't even know. I mean, it can be the thing of, like we're playing board games with our kids and, having a good time, or watching a show that you absolutely love. I know personally, I finally started watching Schitt's Creek after I don't know how many years of people telling me to watch it. And I always knew I would get to it, but now it's like, okay, now I can do that. We have to have those things that are kind of mindless and just upbeat, So do, whatever it is that kind of gets you there. Maybe it's calling that one friend who always makes you laugh. It'd be great if somebody within your household makes you laugh, and that's even better. You're so very fortunate. But let's say you don't have that, or you do, but you need to change it up, because again, we need to have variety in this. And, so call that friend, do what it takes to kind of make sure that you're having some moments of laughter. Another big aspect to staying mentally healthy is lowering our expectations. And this one is actually really big. Our expectations really set the stage for ourselves as far as, how we're like, if we're going to feel bad, or that we're not doing enough, or that we're not good enough, or whether or not we feel satisfied and accomplished. It's all about the expectations we set for ourselves. And so I would say lower your expectations of yourself. I mean, right now, this is, even if we're not talking about perfectionism here, because that's something on, and a lot of people struggle with this. It's a whole different level of it. But being aware that, first of all, we can't be perfect. We're in the wrong species for that. But second of all, we just need to really realize that whether or not you're feeling anxious right now, maybe you're not, but these are really traumatic times. And so just saying like, okay, what I normally expect of myself, maybe I'm just going to be okay with not getting there. I know for me, like I started making to-do lists that were like three items long. And there are times where I'm not getting those 3 things done. And I'm really trying to make them the most important things. But there's so many unexpected interruptions, I'm sure, depending on, if you're running a business or if you're dealing with work stuff in crisis. And if you're having to still go to work, you can be extra depleted during this time because there's a whole additional layer of stress on top of regular work expectations. So really lowering the expectations of what you can do in a day, of, what you're expecting of yourself. Like if you expect yourself to always cook like really healthy meals for either yourself or your family every single day, I don't know, maybe you need to lower that expectation and realize that, there are just going to be these times we need to do takeout if they're still open in your area. Or, like I've eaten more frozen pizzas in the last like couple of weeks than I have in years. So it may have only been like 2 or 3 pizzas, but I really, we just got to realize like what is easy? What is the easiest thing I can do? We also have to lower our expectations of others. And this is not about settling or giving people passes. It's really about, we have to understand that everybody's in this place of stress and we all make mistakes. And so especially with the people inside your household, um, being understanding that, they're going to screw things up, they're going to forget things, because this is what happens when we're under an immense amount of stress. And so instead of getting really upset about that, trying to approach it with a sense of understanding, because most of the time, people in our lives are not trying to do things on purpose to piss us off. It's often the opposite. That doesn't mean that that happens, but I think being really compassionate to yourself and to others about like, okay, so this is what was supposed to happen and it didn't. So let's just move on and try again. I think that goes a really long way. Especially when, they may be struggling with something you don't know, or, like let's say your friend said they were going to call you back and then they didn't call till the next day, or they totally forgot to call. Again, giving people, I guess it is kind of giving people a pass a little bit, having some understanding that it probably isn't personal. And I kind of already touched on this, but like kind of adjusting what can you accomplish in a day? And what are those expectations anyway? Do you expect that, again, I'll use the example of you have kids at home, that you're going to get all of their schoolwork done and all of your work done that you would normally get in a normal day, and you're going to take care of your house, and you're going to find that free time and family time and all of that. I mean, that's just not realistic. There's just no way. And so I think this one's a big one. Another big thing that's coming up is, what are all the things we're feeling? And, with feelings, what we do, it really depends. Sometimes, we're feeling, stressed or anxious, or right now we might be feeling grief or sadness or confusion or disappointment. There's so many different things that we could be feeling, and they can switch up, several times a day during all of this. And so it's important, I think it's helpful to try to identify what it is you're feeling, because sometimes we don't even know. We just have this feeling of unease or uncertainty. And sometimes there's not much we can do about it. Like if we're feeling really stressed about what's happening, on a global level, we're not going to be able to have much impact on that. But it's also something that's coming up for us, and it's important that we feel that. And sometimes just acknowledging it and just understanding, like, okay, this is what's going on. This is why I feel off, or I feel upset, or I feel extra tender today. And just acknowledging that and being kind to yourself, like saying, okay, maybe today I expect even less of myself because this is what's coming up for me. Maybe you read a story that broke your heart about what people are going through during these times, or, something happened with a loved one, or somebody really well got sick and you're concerned for them. And even though we can support people and we can be there for our close loved ones, again, there's not much we can do about it. And so sometimes it's just being aware of that and acknowledging those feelings. And then there are times where what we can do is we address the feelings. So sometimes there are things that we're feeling anxious about or stressed about that the best thing to do, in addition to feeling them, is to address them. So, an example of that might be if we're feeling really stressed out about money, if we just ignore that and just feel stressed all the time, first of all, that's not going to be very helpful, but it's also not going to help change the circumstance. And maybe you'd say, oh, there's nothing I can do. I lost my job. There are still choices and things that we can do. And so it's important to understand, like, what are the things I can address and what are the things I can't. So that kind of goes into what things can we control. So, like the instance of you're feeling stressed about money. And I've talked about this on a couple of the other videos from this last week, but a strategy that I find really helpful and that I've suggested to lots of clients and other people have done it and they find it very helpful as well is, okay, let's look at what are your finances. Have everything written down, or if you already have a budget, I use Excel because I love Excel, but write everything down that you have to pay for in the next few months or what your monthly bills are, and then look at what is the income that's coming in. Because for a lot of people, I know that's changed, but figuring out, okay, what realistically is coming in, and then making adjustments in what you're spending your money on. And so even though it's a small thing, that is something that you have within your control. You can decide, how am I going to spend my money? How am I going to figure out if there's a deficit? Like, where is it going to be a loan that I use or a credit card? Or, am I going to sell things? Whatever it is that you're going to do, that you're going to figure out, that's the stuff where we can take some action because we're feeling anxious about something. If we're really concerned that we're going to get sick, we can make choices to stay home and make sure that we're really limiting when we go out and find other ways to get the things that we need, like food. So the things that are in our control are usually how we're feeling to an extent. I mean, we feel our feelings. How we behave and how we respond to something is in our control. And I'm not saying that's always fun or easy, but that's really, I think, what we're really limited in, what we have control over in this world and in our lives. And so you can control your environment and the behaviors that you're taking, the things that you're doing to make yourself feel better. That goes back to some of those earlier points that we talked about. Things that you're doing to take care of yourself or cope or respond when you notice that something's becoming a bigger problem. So to remember that, that's the kind of stuff that we have control over. Outside of our control, we can't really control what our government does. We can't control who's going to get sick and who's not. We can't control the impact this is going to have on our economy. I mean, those are things that are really big and scary, and they're outside of what we as a single person have influence over. And so all we can do in this time is take care of ourselves and the things that are within our control. Another important, and I hate to say the most important but it is a really important factor in your mental health and well-being, is connection. We are built for connection. Connection is about love and it's about belonging. And as human beings, we might have a spectrum of like how social we are or how much time we like spending with other people, but we all need and crave connection at a deep biological level. There's this great quote by Brené Brown who said, "We don't have to do it all alone. We were never meant to." And I think I love that. I love that idea of, I think so many people feel like they need to be the strong ones for people in their life during all of this. Maybe that's actually what you do for a living. You take care of other people, or you're the first responder or frontline person who's needing to show up and be the calm presence that does make things happen. But the reality is, in our individual lives, we don't do it alone. We need each other, and we need to get support from one another. And, there are different types of connection. And, there's something as a therapist who specializes in relationships, like talking about connection, I do it all the time. It really makes a huge difference in our lives, like how connected we feel. And so right now, I know there are some challenges. There's some challenges in feeling connected to others. And I guess I would invite you to look at maybe it's a little bit different. And, maybe it's not your ideal. Like maybe you're alone and you're wishing um, you could, have someone to hold or have that physical connection. And, that's part of that grief part, that disappointment. It might not look exactly how you want it to look, but it's still connection. And it's still important that even if it's not like your ideal, like maybe it's, plan C, it's good enough to get you through this. And it's good enough to keep you from being in that place where you feel really dark and alone. And so I really invite you to try different things. So one is virtual dates. Again, I know we've talked about this a lot on the videos, but um, there's so many people reaching out to other people right now, which I think is just fantastic. I love seeing it. And I think probably you belong to groups, whether it's, business stuff and you have business connections, or it's a hobby that you do, or I've had a few different people talk about like their sororities or people that they had deep relationships with at different points. They're reconnecting and they're connecting online. There's so many software programs that are offering this as free options. There's obviously Skype and FaceTime and Google Hangouts and Google Meet and Zoom, and there's so many different things. So there's a lot of ways to connect with people via your phone or your computer or your tablets or whatever. So I think having something where you can see each other's faces is the next best thing to being with somebody, because then you get to see their facial expressions. And 90% of communication is nonverbal. So there's so much we pick up on and feel connected with when we get to see each other's faces. So I would really recommend scheduling that. Especially if you're somebody who's alone, or you don't typically reach out to people, I would say try to schedule at least one a week. I mean, find what's your balance. Like some people need more than that. And it's okay that you're needing connection outside of your household, right? Like if you have a partner or children at home, like I know you're connecting with them, but you also need other people. Like we need it's a social support network. It's not a couple. Like that's not what we're in mental health when we're talking about, making sure somebody's healthy and when we're worried about stuff like depression or suicide, we're always checking about the social support network. And so we need more than just one person or two people. And so it's not saying you need everybody, but just being able to connect and have those times where you can talk to another human being. So reach out to your friends, even if you're the introvert, because your extroverted friends really need you in these times. And making sure that at least once a week, I would say at a minimum, you're connecting with people. Social media, I know it gets a bad rap, and I understand it. I understand the downside of it. And this goes back to like, I think my first point, which is also be aware of the kind of social media that you're taking in. So for me, I stopped kind of looking at my social media late at night because I don't want to read something that's really upsetting to me and then be thinking about it all night, because that's the kind of person I am. And so I just know that about myself. So I think, there can be downsides. And especially if you're in a really low place and you're just finding yourself like reading people's stuff and comparing yourself to them, or feeling like you're less than or not as good a parent or whatever else, the old saying of like, you don't compare your life with somebody else's like sliver of the pie. You're only seeing like one aspect of something. And so, that's the downside. The upside is if you have good connections or people that, you're connecting with, especially if there's things you're struggling with. And, I think a lot about like my business owner friends who are, concerned about what's going on and concerned about, can their business get through this period of time? Will they be able to sustain it? I think social media can be wonderful in that connection. Plus, people post funny things and you get to laugh and you get to feel like you're together. And so I think it's kind of nice, but you do have to be mindful, like know, know what your network looks like, and be thoughtful about that. So in-person connection, obviously, I think for most people, that's the ideal. I guess I won't say for everybody. But the people, if you're lucky enough to be quarantining with others, make sure that you're actually taking time to connect with them. So, having conversations, like sitting down without other distractions and actually talking to your partner or your children or whoever else is in your household, actually having one on one conversations is really really important that during this time. I think again we can get caught up in the day-to-day grind and all of the expectations that, we have to get done, or things that we have to get done, just the logistics of life, especially for those who are still having the expectation on them that they have to complete all of their work. But there's also a lot less distractions in many ways, so it is an opportunity for us to kind of slow down and do that. I think it's nice when, I have 3 children, like taking time, and I do not do this every day because there's no way I could do that. In fact, during the week, I'm still in work mode. So I'm definitely busier during the week, but on the weekends, like I try to take time with each one of them to do something with them, whether that's play some Candyland, or, we snuggle and watch a movie together that they picked or something like that. Or, my husband and I have our shows together, but it's not just about watching shows and movies. It's also about, can we sit down together and just talk about things? And, sometimes there's value in talking about the things that we're stressed about, but I don't want you, I mean, not sometimes, there's value in talking about that, of course, but I don't want you only talking about things that you're stressed about and negative things. You need to be able to just connect and talk about other stuff as human beings, because again, we have to be mindful of how much we're immersed in all this COVID stuff. So yeah, if your partner is somebody who's, talking about it 24/7, I think it's okay to put those boundaries on, like, hey, I need to limit this to like 30 minutes a day because it's just too much for me. So have those conversations. And then physical touch. Again, I think we can get really busy, and some people, when they're stressed out, they kind of pull away. And some people, when they're stressed out, they're needing extra, physical touch, or they need extra support or love in whatever way that they experience that. So I think it's, important. That's another thing to talk about. Like, what is it that you're needing from your partner? And, have those conversations. It's really important. And that's really the only way we can guarantee that a need gets met. I mean, it's not a guarantee. Our partner could say no, but most likely our partner's going to want to be there for us. So asking them for what you need is really important. Another one that came up this week is our pets. They are a great source of connection. And so, when you're feeling stressed, taking that time to just, have extra snuggles with your pets, or take an extra walk with your pet, whatever it is, it is a valid form of connection, and it's really important. And so, they're like family members for, the people that love their pets. So they're all sources of connection. Then there's the connection to yourself. And this goes back to some of the self-care stuff of giving yourself some space and silence, and really checking in with yourself about what is it that you're needing. How are you feeling? Maybe you've been feeling really good. Maybe, you've had a few great days, and then you start to feel some anxiousness. Like, being able to check in, what is it that you're wanting? And I think this is a good time, when we have a little bit of extra space, to be thinking about long term, after all of this has kind of resolved itself, which we hope, eventually it will do. It'll eventually change. What is it that you're wanting for yourself in the long term? And so start thinking about that and planting those seeds. It's kind of creating the life that you're wanting. And so connecting to yourself is really important. And I think we often forget about that. So, coping strategies. Let's say, you're doing all this great stuff, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have days where we feel bad, or we feel overwhelmed or anxious. There's a lot of different things that we can do when we start to feel overwhelmed. And like I said earlier, I really could talk for probably days about this, but I just wanted to be able to give some ideas to get people started if they're feeling particularly overwhelmed or anxious. So, one aspect of that is looking at your self talk and the language that you're using with yourself. If you're starting to feel really anxious about something, looking at it and the self talk piece is, are we amping ourselves up or are we helping ourselves have a more realistic view or maybe a neutral view of something? Um, there's a great, it's like my brain stopped working for a minute. There's a great, I can't even think of the word, exercise that this author Tara Brach came up with, and it's called RAIN. And it's a tool for mindfulness and compassion building. And so what it stands for is recognize what is happening. So it's RAIN, RAIN. Recognize what is happening. Allow the experience just to be there, just as it is. Investigate with interest and care. So check in, like, why am I feeling that way? What's really coming up for me? And then nurture yourself with self-compassion and understand, like, let's say you did something and you made a mistake at work, or you're embarrassed about something you did, or maybe you're upset with yourself for how you reacted to your spouse or your child, when you're feeling extra stressed out. It's not about, if we judge ourselves or we're beating ourselves up, rarely do we make better choices when we're in a place of pain. So having that self-compassion is a way of not excusing ourselves, but a way of saying, like, it's okay. I made a mistake. I am human. And now I'm going to try better. And so that's a really, kind of great exercise, like I said, to go through. So it's RAIN. And I will definitely put links in once the videos are done to share that with people so they can use that as a resource when they're feeling really amped up or upset about something. The other piece is the language we use. If we are in a place where we're like, I'm stuck at home, I can't go anywhere, my business is tanking, I'm going to be bankrupt. If we're always in that place, it's really going to skew how we're feeling. And as human beings, we're already biologically predisposed to skew negative. That's part of, it's been put in our lizard brain, which is what they call the brainstem, the parts of our brain that are the oldest parts of our brain. And it's not the part that uses reasoning, it's this feeling part. And it says, like, how can I stay safe? It's the part that kept us alive when survival was really all our life was about. So it doesn't really fit anymore because we're not usually just in survival mode. I mean, we can get in that place sometimes, but we're in a place where we have a lot more options and opportunities, but we can still be stuck in that negative thinking. So it's really important to kind of be aware of how we're talking to ourselves or others. And so even changing up, like, I'm stuck in the house, to, I get this time to be in my house to, take care of things that I've been wanting to do, or, work on projects that I'm wanting to do, trying to find the positive in it. So it's kind of like a reframe. Now you have to find what works for you because, you don't, for some people it's like, well, that's total bullshit. And that's not the point of it. It's not to just lie to yourself. It's about figuring out, is there a way that's more helpful to look at it so that you don't feel stuck? Because if you're just like, oh, I'm stuck in the house, it's just going to feel terrible. But if you can find ways that you're, focusing on the positive, because if the more we focus on that, the more it expands. So that would be my suggestion there. Yeah, for some people, like, I've heard people saying, oh, I get to spend more time with my kids than I've ever spent in my life because they had to go back to work after 3 months. And for them, it's just this great opportunity. And so they're focusing on that as opposed to being stuck. And the other people, being at home with their kids like this is very stressful. And I also want to put out there that one is not a better parent than the other, because it's really about personal, like what's going on for us and kind of how we're coping. And so for the person who they can absolutely love their children, but they really need a break from it, or maybe they're being expected to get all their work done at the same time, whereas the other person, they have more flexibility. So I think it's one of those things that's deeply personal about, what are the things that you're grateful for and what can you focus on instead of those feelings of being stuck or overwhelmed. There's another technique, a breathing exercise. If you're finding yourself really triggered or activated and you're feeling overwhelmed, it can be the 4-7-8 breathing technique, where you breathe in through your nose to the count of 4. So it's, to the count of 4. Then you hold your breath for 7 counts, and then you exhale through your mouth for 8 counts. And so that's just one technique of slowing your breathing down and really being intentional about that. And what that does is it triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm ourselves. So if we're getting into that place where we're feeling really anxious and we're in like fight or flight mode, it helps relax our body. And when our body relaxes, it helps our mind to relax, and it helps us get back to that place. So that's another great technique. And sometimes when we're feeling super overwhelmed and we're doing all these other great self-care things and all the things we need to do, sometimes we need to talk to a professional. You could also talk to other people in your life if you have really supportive people who don't just try to fix things, but they actually listen. And I think, especially if you're struggling and you have friends and you're commiserating with them, that can be helpful to an extent. And then there's a time where you realize like, okay, nothing's really shifting about this, so I might need to be talking to somebody outside of that circle. So that would be one of my suggestions, is to, think about what is it that I'm needing, and, do I need to talk to somebody else who can give me other coping strategies? And that goes back to checking in. What are you needing? Sometimes when we're feeling really overwhelmed or starting to feel really depressed, maybe we're needing more connection. And so we need to reach out to those people in our life. Or maybe we're really needing connection with our partner. And so specifically talking to them about that. Sometimes we're just really tired and we haven't slept well in days, and that's going to skew how we're feeling. And we just need to, make sure we're getting some good sleep and maybe go to bed early and turn off the social media, whatever it is that we need to do, so that way we can feel better. And sometimes we're hungry, so it just really depends. So checking in, what is it that you're needing? This afternoon I was needing chocolate. It really just depends. So you just got to find what is the thing that when you're starting to feel that way helps you. Another way to kind of break that up is to do something physical. So, if you've been stuck and you're just feeling kind of blah, or you're feeling stressed, or you're starting to feel anxious, exercise is wonderful because it's one of the few ways that we can get cortisol, which is the stress hormone, out of our system. So just exercising and taking care of ourselves, it really does change things up. So the other thing I would say is, what is the upside of this? So I'm going to go back to a little bit of video here and see if there are any questions. Thank you, Taryn. I think you're amazing too. The upside of this, I know this is hard because I think for a lot of people, it's such a whirlwind change and a lot of negative things have happened. Maybe you or somebody you know has gotten really sick and you're worried about them, or, maybe financially you're in jeopardy, because I know a lot of businesses are struggling. There are some businesses that are really thriving in this time, and there are others that are not. And the uncertainty, we as human beings do not love uncertainty. We really like to know what to expect, and embracing and being okay with uncertainty is really helpful, but it's hard to do. But if we can look at, this kind of goes back to the self-talk or the reframing, what are some of the things that maybe are the upside of this? It's one of, we can be in this place of like, oh, this is terrible. My company closed. maybe you weren't happy there, and it's the catalyst to make you go find a new job. And I'm not saying that short term that financially isn't really difficult. But I guess it's one of those things of like, we don't know. We don't know what are the possibilities. For, like I said, some people, for them, it's they've never gotten to spend this much time with loved ones, whether that's their spouse or their children. For others, that's not so much a upside, like I said. So, but there are opportunities in all of this. Yes, thanks, Paul. You just took the words out of my mouth. There are opportunities for more connection, and connection that's really based on much deeper things than maybe we had time for before. Sometimes I think that we are so busy in our lives, and we're so busy going from one thing to the next and doing and buying and, just go, 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 that it's like this has really forced all of us to slow down. And that's really scary, but it really could be amazing as well. And we can find ourselves having deeper connections with people in our lives, and maybe even figuring out that, hey, these certain things weren't actually working for me. This wasn't what I was wanting, or it doesn't fit for me anymore. And so it's the catalyst for figuring out what it is you do want in your life. For some people, it's finally having the opportunity to just really get their house in order. Which I know some people think like maybe that's not something that's super important, but it can be, because your environment has a huge impact on you. And so being able to kind of take care of things that you've been putting off, and I did a video with a professional organizer, and we talked about this for that very reason, because our stress levels are often impacted by what our home environment is, putting out there as well. And next week I'm talking with a lawyer when we're going to talk about estate planning. And so even though I know it's things we would normally like to avoid, we actually have this time and space to actually maybe take care of some of this stuff. And when we feel that, it actually does reduce our stress and it feels better. So there are opportunities. They may be hard to find. And like I said, that's where talking to people, and you've got to figure out what it is for you. But I think they can be there. And if we can find those, that will really help us get through all of this. Because, when we go through traumatic events, they're going to happen. These traumatic events happen, and it's figuring out like, what can I learn from it, and what can I do going forward, for myself, and what can be the takeaway. So I know that was a harder one, but like I said, I would love to hear if anybody's able, people are coming up with this. Like I think I've shared some of the ones that I'm hearing from people about more quality time, taking care of things, or doing things, or exploring hobbies that they never had time to do. For a lot of extroverts, well, actually for a lot of introverts too, I would say they probably are like, oh, I don't feel this pressure to like have to go somewhere or do something. So now there's all this time that they can just, enjoy. So we do have a question. What about those of us that are stressed because we have to go to work and we don't want to? Yeah, that's a big one. I'm actually we're doing a live next, let me see the schedule. It's next week, where I'm specifically talking to somebody else about this. We're both going to be sharing strategies around it, with a ER doctor who's in the front lines. That's a tough one, where you've got to figure out like, how can I think it's really important to make sure you're doing a lot of good coping, and then figuring out like, is there something you can do about that though? Like, can you talk to the people that you work for? Or, if you work for yourself, it's a different thing. It's like checking in, like, can I open up? What are the options for me? Because sometimes, especially in like older businesses, there's this idea that like, this is the one way to do something, and that's the only effective way. And what I'm finding is really, it's more about preference. It's like what we're used to. So yes, going into people's homes. So that's one of those things of, why do we have to do that? There's enough technology in the world that we don't have to go into people's homes right now. Now, there could be exceptions to that. Like if you're a home healthcare worker who's going in and actually has to physically help the person, I think it's about making sure you're doing things to manage your stress and having a healthy outlet. So I think that, we're going to go into more strategies about that next time because I'm just aware of the time as well. Um, and it's a hard one. I would say have a conversation with your, you know, your superiors, your manager or whoever, and be really advocating for yourself. If it's something you absolutely have to do because it's something you physically have to be in person to do, then I do think it's really important that you're taking steps or you have the right support to make sure that you're doing it in the safest, healthiest way possible. I mean, some of this stuff is just really hard because we can't change the reality of what's going on, but it's about how can we minimize the risk that we're taking? How can we determine for ourselves like what we are and are not willing to do? And how do we take care of ourselves when we are, when those two things are like pulling against each other? I don't know if that's helpful, but that would be my suggestion. And like I said, next week, I think it's Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday. I will be talking to Charmaine Gregory, who's an ER doctor, and we'll be talking about more strategies around that because I know it's a really tough position that a lot of people are in. I'm talking to a lot of people who are firemen and police officers and healthcare workers. And then, I think about all the people in the grocery stores who are really getting a ton of exposure on a daily basis. And so there are a lot of people who are having to show up for jobs that cause them a ton of anxiety. And so it's one of those things of, at a certain point, you just got to do what you can to take care of yourself. And then you also have to figure out like, maybe I'm not willing to risk that. And I'm not saying there's not a downside to that decision. There is, but that's the part you have in control. So I'm getting another comment. Yeah, Paul said you might be the one who brings the technology. Like you say, older agencies may be too rooted in one way to provide services rather than realize creative ways of providing telehealth. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's why I think having that conversation, like a really frank, difficult conversation with your, supervisors or bosses, and because yeah, we just become used to things and we think that's the only way to do it. And, we see this a lot in corporate and in healthcare where it's like, this is the one way we do it. And it is scary and it is different. And I know for me, like we transitioned to doing all online sessions at Fremont Counseling Services. And that was hard because my therapists, their preference is to work in person. I know I love working in person. It's kind of my preference, but it's not possible. So we had to transition. And for a lot of clients, it was their preference as well. But I think we're going to realize that as time goes on, as this goes on, for however long, that we still need that support. And so rather than say, if I can't get it this way, I'm not going to do it at all, saying like, okay, what's our other option during these times? So being more open to the other options. So thank you all for joining me. I hope, there was some good information here about, coping and kind of taking care of yourself and trying to stay mentally healthy. And like I said, if it gets to a point where you feel like you've passed that threshold and you're really struggling and you're really feeling depressed or down or, suicidal, or you're just feeling overwhelmed with anxiety and you can't relax and you can't kind of talk yourself down, then I really do advocate reaching out to professionals. Pretty much all the therapists I know have transitioned to telehealth because they had to at this time. And so there are so many people, and you could even find somebody who's in your area so that, if they do transition back to in person, you could see them in person if you wanted to. But I think there's a lot of people out there that, have help and support. And if you're needing more information from me, you can check me out and my services at amberholly.com. Also over at mybizbestie.com, and I'm on Instagram at it's Amber Holly, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have or give you any support. And again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you're doing everything you can, and also like if you're doing nothing, like if you're in a place where you're like, I just want to veg out, I don't want to do anything, and I just want to watch Marvel movies, then do that. That's what you need to do. It's such a personal decision, and it's such, we just have those days. We can't expect our energy is the same every single day. That's unrealistic. We are not robots. You can have one day that's super productive and you feel like, damn, I got this, and you're on fire. And the next day can be total shit. And you're like, that's it. Calling in, calling in and just saying, all I'm going to do today is make sure that I feed myself and I entertain myself. I mean, maybe that's all you can do. And I think that's the kind of self-compassion I'm really advocating. So be kind to yourself. These are hard times. And let me know if there's anything you need. Thanks so much.